that was illegally parked. The arrogant owner retaliated mercilessly, beating my mother so severely that she lost her sight before that person sped away without a second thought. My fiancé, Jacob Williams, rushed to the scene immediately. While preserving evidence and calling the police, he also took care of my mother, comforting her with gentle words. Tears welled up in my eyes. Moved by his kindness, I accepted his proposal at my mother's hospital bedside. For 3 years after our marriage, he treated me exceptionally well and showed the same kindness to my mother. Yet the agony of blindness tormented my mother endlessly. The stress and sorrow took a toll on her health, leading to liver disease that eventually landed her in the ICU. Jacob arranged for a trusted doctor and took great care of her, but one night I overheard him speaking in a Chapter 1. My mother accidentally scraped a luxury car that was illegally parked. The arrogant owner retaliated mercilessly, beating my mother so severely that she lost her sight before that person sped away without a second thought. My fiancé, Jacob Williams, rushed to the scene immediately. While preserving evidence and calling the police, he also took care of my mother, comforting her with gentle words. Tears welled up in my eyes. Moved by his kindness, I accepted his proposal at my mother's hospital bedside. For 3 years after our marriage, he treated me exceptionally well and showed the same kindness to my mother. Yet the agony of blindness tormented my mother endlessly. The stress and sorrow took a toll on her health, leading to liver disease that eventually landed her in the ICU. Jacob arranged for a trusted doctor and took great care of her, but one night I overheard him speaking in a hushed voice on the balcony. $5 million for a full recovery. Forget it. Just pull the plug. That money was meant for the seaside villa I planned to gift Wendy. I owe Wendy for not marrying her back then. This is my way of making it up to her. Besides, Wendy didn't mean to blind my mother-in-law. It was an accident and she always felt guilty all these years. She can only be freed from that guilt once my mother-in-law is dead. As for my wife, I've never been physically unfaithful, so I haven't betrayed her, but my heart was never hers to begin with. 2 minutes later, I received a text from the doctor. Your mother has just passed away. My condolences. Clutching my phone, I collapsed to my knees, sobbing silently. I knew then the only person in this world who truly loved me was gone. I looked at Jacob, still standing on the balcony, engrossed in his phone call. My heart churned with indescribable emotions. He had once been my rock, my greatest love, but now he was the blade that had pierced my heart. The day my mother was attacked, he was in the middle of a board meeting. The moment he heard the news, Jacob abandoned the executives and ordered his driver to speed to the scene. I had thought it was out of concern for my mother, only now did I realize he was worried about Wendy. No wonder the culprit was never found despite committing the crime in broad daylight. It was him. He had helped Wendy cover up the evidence. Wendy, his university classmate, his first love. I had known about their past when we got engaged, but I didn't care about his history. I only cared whether he loved me. His tenderness, his thoughtful gestures, his constant warmth, they had made me let my guard down. He made me believe I was worthy of being his wife, that he was mine and no one could take him away. So I never interfered with his normal interactions with Wendy, but I never realized I had been living in a web of lies all along. My marriage was nothing but a pathetic joke. Jacob walked in from the balcony, his face etched with sorrow. He held me in his arms and whispered, "The doctor just called. Mother-in-law has passed away." I nodded slightly and gently pushed him away. "Jacob, don't touch me anymore. Your embrace only chills me to the bone." He looked at me, eyes filled with concern. "Julie, are you okay? Don't worry. Even if your mother is gone, you still have me." I stared at him blankly, speechless. If I had heard these words before, I would have been overwhelmed with emotion, clinging to him with tears in my eyes. But now, all I could do was admire his acting skills. His words echoed in my mind. As for my wife, my heart was never hers to begin with. So the man I had loved so deeply had never loved me back. The perfect marriage I had once proudly flaunted was nothing but my own delusion. How ironic. Without saying a word, I stood up and locked myself in my room. Chapter 2. Only a thin door separated me from Jacob, and I never wanted to see him again. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Jacob. Julie, get some rest. Don't worry about the funeral arrangements. I'll make sure your mother has a grand farewell. I replied with a simple answer. Then, I sent a message to my lawyer, draft a divorce agreement for me. The funeral was grand. Because of Jacob's status in the business world, many people came to pay their respects. He truly did what he promised. He gave my mother a dignified send-off, but all I wanted was for her to be alive, even if it meant living a quiet, unnoticed life. Mom, I miss you so much. I knelt in front of her portrait, silently shedding tears. Suddenly, a mocking voice sounded behind me. Juliana, everyone dies eventually. My condolences. I froze. When I turned around, I saw Wendy standing there. She wore a black trench coat and held a bouquet of white roses, clearly here for the funeral. But beneath her coat's collar, a flash of bright red fabric peeked through. This was my mother's funeral. I didn't want to make a scene and disturb her peace in the afterlife. Suppressing the fire in my chest, I merely nodded. But Wendy didn't leave. Instead, she casually tossed the white roses in front of my mother's portrait. Staring at the photo, she sighed regretfully. Auntie never got to find the person who blinded her before she died. Isn't that such a pity? I responded coldly. Justice sees all. I've hired someone to continue the investigation. The culprit won't escape. For a brief moment, panic flickered in Wendy's eyes, but she quickly recovered, letting out a chuckle. After so many years, I doubt that you'll find anything. She sighed dramatically. I wonder if Auntie was able to pass away peacefully. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, she covered her mouth with a giggle. Oh, my mistake. Auntie was blind. She had already closed her eyes long ago. Rage boiled inside me. Without thinking, I raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. Wendy let out a sharp scream and collapsed to the ground. Her cry immediately drew the attention of all the guests. Clutching her cheek, she began to sob pitifully. Jacob and I were just ordinary college classmates. If you don't like me being around him, I'll stop seeing him. Juliana, I know you've never liked me, but I came today to pay my respects. Causing such a scene at a funeral. How can Auntie rest in peace? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say a word, Jacob rushed over. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't even hesitate. All he did was hold Wendy up with a look of deep concern. I stepped forward. Jacob, just now. Before I could say anything more, he cut me off, his voice furious. Get out. He shoved me forcefully. I staggered back and fell to the ground. The bouquet of white roses Wendy had brought landed beside me. Its thorns pierced into my palm. It hurt, but Jacob didn't notice. Instead, he towered over me, berating me mercilessly. Juliana, is this what you call being magnanimous? How many times do I have to say it? Wendy and I are just normal classmates. I've tolerated your jealousy before, but today is your mother's funeral. Can't you at least act with some dignity? Honestly, I'm embarrassed for you. With that, Jacob helped Wendy to her feet and walked away, leaving me there alone. I never imagined that the man who had once been so gentle and caring would humiliate me like this in front of my mother's portrait without even listening to my side of the story. The murmurs of the guests reached my ears. Chapter 3. That Juliana. She has no manners at all. She's really not worthy of Jacob. A woman like her will ruin 3 generations. Jealous, paranoid, stirring up chaos at home. I really don't know how Jacob puts up with her poor man. If she can get violent at her own mother's funeral, imagine what she's like on a normal day. I couldn't defend myself. Tears welled in my eyes as I silently tidied up my mother's memorial table. At some point, Jacob had come to stand behind me. Julie, I spoke too harshly earlier. I came to apologize. I turned around and stared at him. His voice was gentle, but his expression was cold, completely devoid of warmth. Sure enough, he added, but you went too far with Wendy. No matter what, she was a guest. Do you know how many rumors are spreading right now? They're all against you. I've been trying to explain things for you, but it's not working. Listen, if you come with me and apologize to Wendy, she'll clear things up. That way your reputation won't be ruined. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, and I replied sarcastically, I won't apologize. I don't need that kind of reputation. Jacob's patience wore thin. His face darkened as he stepped closer, his voice dropping into a low growl. You made a mistake. You should own up to it. Don't you think you owe Wendy an apology? Juliana, when did you become so shameless? I closed my eyes, letting the tears slip down my cheeks. Jacob had always been gentle to me. He had never spoken to me like this before, but today he had lashed out at me twice, both times because of Wendy. I opened my eyes, my vision blurred by tears. Jacob's face was hazy, out of focus. Then again, had I ever truly seen him clearly? My voice trembled. Jacob, did you really never find out who blinded my mother? He stiffened for a moment before shaking his head firmly. There were no leads, and now that she's gone, what's the point of bringing it up? A hollow, bitter smile spread across my lips. Jacob didn't care what I was thinking. He grabbed my wrist and dragged me into another room. Wendy, Julie is here to apologize, he announced. I looked around. The guests were all there. Every pair of eyes watched me with interest. Jacob leaned in and whispered, I gathered everyone here to clear your name. Clear my name, or force me to bow my head in front of everyone so I could compensate Wendy for her supposed grievances. Jacob gave me a slight push, forcing me toward her. Go on, apologize. I said nothing. Wendy, playing the magnanimous victim, smiled gently. There's no need for an apology. I understand. Juliana is going through a difficult time. Someone started clapping. Soon after, the entire room was filled with applause. Under the cover of the noise, Wendy leaned in and whispered so only I could hear. Juliana, do you know why your mother was blinded? Maybe it was because you stole someone else's happiness. Do you really think you deserve Jacob? A deafening roar filled my head. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object and hurled it at her face. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything. All I could think about was my mother's muffled sobs in the dead of night, the sound of her pain after she had been hurt. By the time someone pulled me away, Wendy's face was already swollen. Chapter 4. Jacob stormed over, his eyes bloodshot with rage. He slapped me hard twice. Then, without a second glance, he carried Wendy away. The guests shook their heads in disappointment before quietly leaving. One by one, the once crowded funeral hall was suddenly empty. I held my mother's memorial portrait, staring at the vacant space around me. Maybe this was for the best. I had been deceived by this fake love for too many years. My mother's funeral didn't need these hypocrites anyway. The ceremony ended in a rush, and I became the joke of the city. Someone even leaked the incident online, where it spread like wildfire. Now everyone knew Jacob's wife, Juliana, was an unfilial disgrace, a crazed woman unworthy of respect. But I didn't care. My heart had long since died. Nothing could stir it anymore. I met with my lawyer, obtained the divorce papers, and asked him to investigate my mother's injury and her medical records from when she was hospitalized. As for me, I returned home to pack my things. Once the divorce was finalized, this place would become Jacob and Wendy's love nest, wouldn't it? I didn't want to leave a single trace of myself behind. The thought of it made me sick. As I sorted through my belongings, I realized that I had kept a lot of things about Jacob. The autumn leaf he once casually gave me, the calendar from the day we first met, an old phone filled with our past conversations. Even the fridge held remnants of our relationship, the first cup of milk tea he ever bought me, a leftover piece of cake from our engagement party. Jacob used to complain that I kept too much trash. However, I always corrected him, telling him those were the memories of our love. But looking at them now, he was right. They were trash. I threw everything into the garbage. As I continued packing, I stumbled upon a thick photo album belonging to Jacob. Curious, I flipped it open. Inside were printed screenshots, pages and pages of messages between him and Wendy. He had carefully preserved their conversations, turning them into a photo collection. Every message was soaked in his longing for her. Wendy, I married her, but my heart belongs to you. Wendy, even when I'm with her, I think of your name. Wendy, I never turn on the lights when I'm with her. That way I can pretend it's you. Wendy, I bought you a seaside villa. You've suffered at the hands of that mother and daughter for so long. This is the least they owe you. Wendy, I want to give you all my money. I know it's crude, but it's the only way I can make it up to you. Please don't refuse me anymore. Wendy, I hate her. She trapped me, keeping me from being with you. I slowly closed the album. A silent, bitter smile curled my lips. So Jacob did have a heart, he just never used it on me. This album had been sitting on his bookshelf all along. I had been too stupid to check, too foolish to ever doubt him. Or maybe Jacob never cared if I found out. If I had caused a scene, demanded a divorce, wouldn't he that have been exactly what he wanted? Then he'd be free to be with Wendy. Fine, I'd give them what they wanted. By the time I had thrown away everything, it was already late at night. I signed the divorce papers and called Jacob. He didn't answer for a long time, but when he did, he hung up immediately. I sent a message instead. Can you come home? There's something I need to discuss with you. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. His voice was filled with fury. Juliana, you know Wendy is injured, and you're still calling me home. What's your problem? Are you really this cruel, this petty? Chapter 5. I'm not coming home tonight. I won't return until you apologize to Wendy. Juliana, you brought this on yourself. I can't believe I was foolish enough to marry you in the first place. Before I could respond, Jacob hung up. When I tried calling him back, I realized he had blocked me. I sat on the couch in silence, staring into the empty night until the first light of dawn crept through the window. It was time to leave. This wasn't my home. There was no family here for me. Just as I stepped outside, my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Ms. Juliana, I have an update on the case you asked me to investigate. We've found substantial evidence. The perpetrator has been identified. 3 years. Jacob had spent 3 years claiming he couldn't find the culprit. But my lawyer, he uncovered the truth in just 3 days. Obviously, I had been too naive, too trusting. If I hadn't placed my faith in Jacob, my mother wouldn't have died with injustice weighing on her soul. The lawyer sent the files to my phone, and just as I had suspected, my mother's attacker was Wendy. Even worse, when Jacob arrived at the scene, Wendy was still beating my mother. Instead of stopping her, he erased the evidence and helped her escape. He silenced every witness with hush money. For 3 years, he had fed me lies. This time, my lawyer went in person to uncover the truth. A small shop owner nearby, unable to bear the weight of guilt any longer, handed over surveillance footage they had kept for years. My mother's medical records were also in the file he sent. The report clearly stated that her condition could have been treated. She could have recovered. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered into the phone, send all of this to Jacob. I didn't want to see him again. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I left the home we had once shared and returned to my mother's old house. The irony stung. Jacob had always claimed to love me, yet he had never once visited the place where I grew up. He didn't even know the address. Yet here, everything remained just as it had when I was a child. Curled up on the old couch, I felt a long-lost sense of safety. The next morning, I went to the telecom store to cancel my phone number. I wanted to cut all ties with Jacob. As I waited, the store's television played an interview with him. On screen, Wendy clung to his arm, looking blissfully content. The reporter smirked and asked, "Mr. Williams, there are rumors online that you and Ms. Wendy were once lovers, that she is the one you truly love. Is that true?" Jacob hesitated before answering. "When my father passed away, he wished for me to marry Juliana." A single sentence. But at that moment the entire audience gasped. Wendy, emboldened, tightened her grip on his arm, her face full of triumph. I bit my lip, forcing back tears. So he had only proposed to me because of Uncle Jace's dying wish. All this time, I had believed he loved me. I had thought his confession came from the heart. But, from the very beginning, I was just fooling myself. Our families had been close for generations. But after my father died, saving Uncle Jace, my family fell from grace. Out of gratitude, Uncle Jace had taken care of my mother and me. I just never imagined that before he passed, he would force Jacob to marry me. I finally understood Uncle Jace had wanted to compensate me, but his kindness had only made Jacob resent me, and in the end it had cost my mother her life. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jacob. "Julie, in love, the one who cares more is always the first to give in. So, I'm giving in. Let's stop this, okay? Let's make up. I've already apologized to Wendy on your behalf and comforted her. I'll be coming home tonight. I want to eat your handmade noodle soup." My tears finally fell, unstoppable. Even now, he was still lying to me. Did he ever truly love me? To him, comforting Wendy was just another way of declaring his love for her. The store clerk glanced at me in surprise, hesitating before asking cautiously, "Ms. Juliana, do you still want to cancel your number?" I nodded. "Yes, cancel it. I don't need it anymore." As I watched the scissors snip through my SIM card, I felt a strange sense of closure, like I had severed MV last connection to the past. Chapter 6. Meanwhile, Jacob sat in a secluded spot, hidden from the cameras, his fingers scrolling through his phone. Perhaps on some instinctual level, he sensed that something was different this time. Whenever they argued in the past, Juliana had always been the first to give in, even when she was the one in tears, even when her heart ached from the injustice. She would swallow her sobs and apologize first, because she loved him, because she couldn't bear for them to be at odds. Whenever cracks appeared in their marriage, she was the one who suffered the most, and so she had always chosen to endure the pain alone, doing whatever it took to hold them together. But this time, he had reached out to her first, and she hadn't responded. Jacob frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. Juliana should have been overjoyed. Shouldn't she have replied immediately, eager to reconcile? His patience snapped. He stepped into a quiet corner and dialed her number. But to his shock, an automated message played in his ear. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." His hands turned cold. His mind went blank. He redialed again and again, but the same emotionless voice echoed back at him each time. A deep sense of unease clawed at his chest. Spinning on his heel, he strode toward his assistant, his voice sharp with urgency. "Drive to the house now. Find out what she's doing." 30 minutes later, the assistant returned, breathless, his expression uneasy. "Mr. Williams, your wife is gone. She took all her belongings with her." Jacob froze, his body turning rigid. It was as if a piece of him had been carved away, leaving only emptiness in its place. At that moment, the door creaked open and a lawyer stepped inside, placing a document on the table. "Mr. Williams," the man said calmly, "Ms. Juliana asked me to deliver this to you. She hopes you'll sign it as soon as possible." Jacob's gaze dropped to the thin stack of paper. He couldn't even lift it. Two simple words: divorce. Agreement felt heavier than a mountain. His throat was dry, his voice hoarse as he asked, "Why?" The lawyer set down a small package beside the papers, his tone steady but firm. "Perhaps this will explain. Take your time, Mr. Williams. When you've made your decision, you can contact me." As the lawyer turned to leave, Jacob suddenly shot up, gripping his arm in desperation. "Where is my wife?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. I'm sorry, I don't know. I truly don't. Jacob stood motionless, staring at the doorway long after the lawyer had disappeared, as if expecting Juliana to walk back in at any moment. Beside him, Wendy eyed the divorce papers, a smug smile playing on her lips. She clung to his arm, her voice laced with artificial concern. Jacob, I can't believe the way Juliana manipulates you. She huffed. You're so outstanding, of course. She wouldn't actually leave you. She's just trying to scare you, forcing you to give in. Humph, I've seen plenty of women like her. They push and push, testing your limits, trying to gain control over you. In the past, Jacob would have nodded in agreement, but this time he quietly pulled his arm away from her grasp. Wendy blinked, startled. Jacob, what's wrong? He didn't respond, as if he hadn't even heard her. Moving like a ghost, he turned to his assistant, gripping his shoulder. His voice was tight and urgent as he spoke. Find her, right now. No matter what it takes, find her. Chapter 7. I'm giving you 1 day. Find Juliana's whereabouts, Jacob coldly added. The assistant nodded nervously and hurried out. Wendy bit her lip, unwilling to accept defeat. Suddenly, her eyes welled up with tears as she whimpered, Jacob, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the funeral. If I hadn't gone to pay my respects to Auntie, you two wouldn't have argued. In the past, whenever Wendy acted pitifully like this, Jacob would always pull her into his arms, comforting her. But this time, her words only irritated him. Can you just let me have a moment of peace? He snapped. Stunned, Wendy froze, then immediately burst into tears. Jacob sighed, feeling guilty. He turned and embraced her. Wendy, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken my frustration out on you. Wendy clung tightly to him, pressing her face into his chest, but a flicker of resentment flashed in her eyes. It's okay, she murmured. Now that she's missing, I'm worried about Juliana too. Jacob's gaze fell on the package on the table. Gently, he pushed Wendy away and began unwrapping it. Several documents and a USB drive spilled out. As he skimmed through the files, his face turned deathly pale. It was his mother-in-law's medical report. The diagnosis clearly stated her illness had been completely treatable, but the decision had been made to abandon treatment. Did Julie already know about this? Jacob slumped into his chair, his voice hollow with despair. Wendy grasped his hand, her expression full of concern. Jacob, don't blame yourself. You didn't do anything wrong. You weren't obligated to spend $5 million to save her. Jacob let out a deep sigh, his face clouded with guilt. Without another word, he picked up the USB drive and plugged it into his computer. The footage was grainy, clearly from an old security camera, but the moment Wendy saw it, her expression changed drastically. With a sharp slap, she slammed the laptop shut. Jacob's eyes darkened with suspicion. Wendy hugged herself, her body trembling. It's the video from when I accidentally hurt Juliana's mother. I'm scared, Jacob. Can we not watch it? Jacob remained silent for a few seconds. Then, turning to the servant, he ordered, take Wendy to the next room. Let her rest. Wendy panicked. She clutched Jacob's arm. Jacob, please don't watch it. I don't want you to see it. Jacob had always indulged Wendy, giving in to her every whim. But today, his resolve was firm. Without a word, he opened the laptop and pressed the play button. 3 minutes later, he sprang to his feet. His entire body was trembling with rage. Storming into the next room, he found Wendy pacing anxiously. As soon as she saw him, she rushed forward cautiously. Jacob, but there was no tenderness in Jacob's eyes, only the devastation of betrayal. Wendy, he growled, gripping her shoulders, why did you lie to me? His voice shook with fury. What did you tell me back then? You said Juliana's mother called you a homewrecker, a whore, a vixen. You said you lost control and accidentally hurt her in a moment of rage. But in the video, she never insulted you. She didn't even know who you were. She was apologizing to you the entire time. Wendy, how could you do it? She was an elderly woman Wendy sobbed. Jacob, you're hurting me. Jacob let go, staring at her with pure disappointment. I always thought my mother-in-law had provoked you on purpose, but I was wrong. I falsely accused her. His voice dropped to a whisper filled with bitterness. Wendy, I never thought you were this kind of person. You're cruel. Chapter 8. Jacob turned and walked toward the door. Immediately, Wendy panicked. She rushed forward and grabbed his hand, but he shook her off. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded, Jacob, even if I lied, does it really matter? I only hit her because I love you. It happened so long ago. Do you really need to dig it up again? She added. Jacob murmured, almost to himself, I was wrong from the start. I failed Juliana's mother. I won't fail Juliana either. I have to find her. Wendy bit her lip, her voice trembling. You don't love me anymore, do you? You always told me that I was the one you loved, not her. She's gone now. Why are you chasing after her? Jacob, were all those sweet words you said to me just lies? Jacob froze. He stood motionless, staring blankly at Wendy's tear-streaked face. Wasn't Wendy the one I loved most? Then why, when she's crying, do I feel nothing? Why is it that I never cared when Juliana was around, but now that she's gone, I can't sleep, I can't eat, I feel like I'm losing my mind? He looked at Wendy in confusion. Why? Wendy threw herself into his arms. Jacob, forget about her, okay? Sign the divorce papers, cut ties with her and marry me. But Jacob gently pushed her away. Taking a step back, he looked at her shocked face and slowly shook his head. Wendy, I can't marry you. I thought I didn't love Juliana. But after 3 years together, every little moment, every memory, she became a part of my life. I was a fool. Only when she left did I realize how deeply I love her. She was the best wife in the world, and I don't think I can find someone like her. With that, Jacob turned and walked out the door. Wendy called after him in despair. Jacob, will you come back? Jacob hesitated for a moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, Wendy, actions have consequences. You hurt my mother-in-law. I hope you'll turn yourself in. After saying that, he left. Wendy stood frozen, staring at his retreating figure. Her lips were bleeding from how hard she'd bitten them. She could taste the metallic tang of blood in her mouth, but her face was twisted into a crazed smile. Meanwhile, at my mother's old house, I finally found peace. She was gone now, but I had started living as she once did. Grocery shopping, cooking, greeting the neighbors. It was my way of remembering her. I never expected that one afternoon, as I returned from the supermarket, I would see a familiar figure. Jacob. He had lost weight in just a few days. His usually neat and polished appearance was gone. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were bloodshot. The moment he saw me, he rushed forward. Julie, I've come to take you home. I didn't respond. I walked past him, heading for my house. His voice was hoarse as he spoke again. Julie, I didn't sign the divorce papers. I was wrong. I finally realized the one I've always loved is you. Let's start over again, okay? I still ignored him. Jacob suddenly dropped to his knees. His voice broke as he choked out, Julie, have you forgotten how much you loved me? Please forgive me. I stared at him for a long time. Then, in a quiet voice, I said, forgiving you is easy. Chapter 9. A flicker of hope ignited in Jacob's eyes, but I remained calm as I finished my sentence. As long as you bring my mother back to me. The light in his eyes died. Instantly, he knelt there, motionless. I opened the door, then shut it heavily, leaving Jacob outside. He didn't leave, and I didn't open the door again. Night fell. The bitter winter wind howled outside, but Jacob seemed oblivious, kneeling beneath my window without moving. Passers-by noticed him and, out of curiosity, recorded a video, which quickly spread online like wildfire. The news went viral. Soon, people recognized him, and before I knew it, I was once again the target of public scrutiny. Jacob kneels for forgiveness late at night. Beware of the ruthless wife. No wonder Jacob abandoned his true love to marry Juliana. This woman clearly has tricks up her sleeve. Does she have something on him? There's no way he'd act like this. Otherwise, everyone, be wary of women like Juliana. I analyzed her face. People who look like her are always dangerous. I let out a bitter laugh, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. After everything I'd been through, these insults no longer had the power to hurt me. Outside, the wind roared. I pulled my blanket tighter around me. I had to take care of myself, just like Mom always told me. If I caught a cold, my back would ache. The next morning, when I stepped outside for breakfast, I saw that Jacob was still there. He hadn't moved all night, but unlike the previous evening, now a crowd had gathered to watch. Jacob slowly lifted his head. His face was filled with desperation as he pleaded, "Julie, please give me another chance. I can give up everything, my pride, my wealth, even my body. I just want you." I walked up to him and spat coldly. "Jacob, this self-torture of yours, it's nothing more than a way to make yourself feel better. You think that by suffering physically, you can atone for your guilt. I'm sorry, but I have no interest in playing this game with you. Leave. I will never forgive you. But if you enjoy kneeling, then go ahead. It doesn't matter to me." Jacob looked at me with deep sorrow. Just then, his assistant ran over, panic written all over his face. "Mr. Williams, bad news, it's a court summons." Jacob was stunned, and the crowd fell silent. The assistant handed him a thin piece of paper. "Wendy is suing you. She submitted chat records as evidence, claiming you once promised to give her all of your wealth. Now, she's demanding you to fulfill that promise." Jacob's fingers clenched tightly around the paper, his veins bulging in fury. He swayed slightly as he forced himself to stand, then turned to me. "Julie, once I handle this, I'll come back for you. Wait for me." With the help of his assistant, he limped toward a waiting luxury car. I noticed his back was slightly hunched. I wasn't sure if it was from kneeling too long or from the crushing weight of realizing his so-called true love's real nature. I didn't care about Jacob, but as one of the country's most powerful businessmen, every move he made became headline news. From scattered reports, I learned how the case was progressing. Because of Jacob's status, the trial was open to the public. The courtroom was packed with reporters. On the witness stand, Wendy spoke passionately, recounting the details of her relationship with Jacob. She displayed their chat history in full, exposing even the most intimate and shameless messages without hesitation. With unwavering confidence, she demanded Jacob keep his word and transfer the entirety of the Vertex Corporation to her. Chapter 10. Throughout the trial, Jacob sat with his head down, sorrow clouding his eyes. Every sweet word that Wendy displayed was like a blade cutting straight through his heart. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. When he had been madly in love with Wendy, I had sent him a love letter every day, filling his inbox with admiration. When he had promised to give all his wealth to Wendy, I had been carefully cherishing every little gift he ever gave me, unable to part with even the smallest trinket. When he had drunkenly lamented to Wendy about fate keeping them apart, I had been at home, waiting for him, preparing a table full of his favorite dishes. Jacob had ignored me for too long. He had overlooked the one person who loved him most. Wendy, on the other hand, looked at the devastated Jacob from across the courtroom, her eyes brimming with triumph. When the judge questioned him, Jacob finally lifted his head and spoke in a calm, resolute voice. "My wife wanted a divorce, but I never signed the agreement. I love her." The promises I made to Wendy were spoken in a moment of reckless passion while I was cheating. They do not count. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Wait, so Wendy was the mistress all along." Jacob admitted it himself. Wendy clenched her teeth so hard she nearly shattered them. The verdict came swiftly. Wendy's claim was dismissed. The court ruled that as a third party in someone else's marriage, her demand for property violated public morals and could not be legally upheld. Outside the courthouse, Jacob was immediately swarmed by reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in his face. A journalist asked, "Mr. Williams, Do you have anything to say about today's ruling? Jacob stared directly into the cameras. Then, to everyone's shock, he dropped to his knees. Juliana, I'm sorry. Gasps filled the air. Jacob no longer cared about his dignity. He knelt on the pavement, tears streaming down his face, and spoke to the cameras as if speaking directly to me. Julie, I know you can see this. Whether you accept it or not, I need to apologize. I need to atone. I was not a good husband. I betrayed your love. I betrayed your mother's trust. His voice broke. Then, in front of the entire world, Jacob confessed everything. He admitted to making the decision to pull my mother off life support without my consent. He admitted to helping Wendy destroy evidence, letting my mother die in injustice. And then he handed all the proof over to the press. The scene outside the courthouse turned chaotic. Online discussions exploded into a frenzy. No one had expected things to take such a turn. So Juliana was the real victim. All along, the man she loved spent years cheating on her and even played a part in her mother's death. This is heartbreaking. To those who used to insult Juliana, do you feel ashamed now? While we sympathize with Juliana, we also need to make sure Wendy doesn't get away with this. Agreed. Homewreckers deserve no mercy. Strangers began showing up at my home, leaving flowers, gifts, and letters of apology. I pulled the curtains shut and locked my doors. I didn't want to see anyone. Jacob was taken into custody for further investigation, but the Williams family quickly posted bail for him. However, Wendy fled before she could be arrested. With the evidence now in police hands, she was officially charged with intentional assault causing permanent injury and placed on the wanted list for a criminal offense. She went into hiding, afraid to show her face, but she had already become a public enemy. Whenever someone spotted her, they would immediately call the police. Authorities tightened control over the city's borders, ensuring she had no way to escape. Chapter 11. With the entire hotel system connected to the Skynet surveillance network, Wendy didn't dare to check into any place. Rumors spread that the Ramirez family had publicly severed all ties with her in an effort to distance themselves. She had nowhere left to go. Her capture was only a matter of time. Jacob came again. Every day he knelt outside my home, begging for my forgiveness. Day by day he grew more haggard, as if he were trying to atone with his own life, but I no longer loved him. His self-inflicted suffering did not move me, it only disturbed my peace. I wanted to move away, to leave everything behind. That day, as I was packing my things, a commotion erupted outside. Through the window, I saw Jacob clutching his chest, collapsing onto the ground. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading rapidly. Wendy stood beside him, gripping a blood-stained knife, laughing maniacally. Then, she turned her gaze toward me. She raised the dripping blade, pointing it straight at me. Her voice was shrill, deranged. Juliana, you stole my life. Everything should have been mine. Jacob was mine. His fortune should have been mine. If I can't have it, then neither can you. The police arrived swiftly and subdued her. Even as they dragged her into the police car, she continued hurling curses at me. I stepped outside just in time to see Jacob being lifted into an ambulance. His face was deathly pale, yet he managed a weak smile, one of relief. Julie, I have atoned. I watched as the ambulance drove away, then slowly shook my head. Jacob, this is not atonement. This is simply your retribution. I will never forgive you, and I cannot forgive you on my mother's behalf. A cold wind howled through the streets, carrying the first snowfall of the season. Within minutes, the pristine white snow had covered the bloodstains on the ground. It was as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew the truth. No matter how well we cover something, it still existed. A month later, an estate lawyer contacted me. He told me that even before the stabbing, Jacob's body had already been severely weakened. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the attack had left him in critical condition. Now he was in a vegetative state, trapped in a body that was neither alive nor dead, and legally I was still his wife. As a result, ownership of the Vertex Corporation now fell to me. I followed the lawyer to the hospital. The doctor spoke to me in a calm, measured tone. Mr. Williams has no chance of waking up, no matter how expensive no treatment can change that. Keeping him on life support will only prolong his suffering. My recommendation is to withdraw life support and let him pass peacefully. I looked at Jacob lying on the hospital bed. Expressionless, I shook my head. No, I won't pull the plug. Mr. Williams enjoys repenting, doesn't he? And only the living can repent.